I want to introduce our leader, Jim Peacock. Jim is a died and true Texas Aggie, Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. He was Tau Beta Pi, Phi Kappa Phi, top 10% of his engineering class, and the commanding officer of the Cadet Corps. That's a big deal. He joined the Air Force. He was at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. He was a lieutenant in the Air Force. He had engineering design responsibilities, testing and support for the nuclear-armed fighter bombers. He wasn't a nuclear engineer, but he got close enough to know he might be in trouble. In 1962 to 1984, he served as an aerospace engineer at the Johnson Space Center right next door. He was on the Apollo program, SkyLab, Space Shuttle. He had positions, leadership positions for design, testing, flight planning, mission operations, and astronaut training. Did they ever listen to you, Jim? If I doubt it, but they said, "Where's this guy from?" Aggie Land. I said, "Well, we'll accommodate that." Then he spent a little time designing and building and operating his own boat and RV storage right here in the Clear Lake area. In 1986, he designed and built his retirement home on the Caribbean beach in Cozumel. That's where he met Aldara. She's around here somewhere. His hobbies, sailing and scuba diving. And in 2015, 2005, Jim was it, he moved to Brenham, Texas. He built another home, which is supposed to be his country home, and that's where he resides. So thank you, Jim, for pulling this together. We're following your lead, even though you're an Aggie, but we're happy to do it. So we're going to move along to the program now. Jim, I think we're going to entertain a few remarks from you, our homebrewed Texas Aggie.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for the wonderful introduction you gave me. You oversold me a little bit. You made me look like I was the top of everything, but I often was runner-up to a lot of things. As like the listed myself as a commanding officer at Corps Cadets at A&M. My roommate beat me out, but I did have command of about 1/8 of the Corps at that time. The rest of this stuff is not eventful, except that I met my wife in Cozumel, Mexico, and we've been happily married ever after. Yeah, I wanted to say that the how we started the TRCS actually was at a barbecue and beer invitation of Tom Mosier, and there were about 20 Apollo retirees and their wives there, and we enjoyed a couple of hours of eating and not heavy on the drinking beer, but somewhat. And then Tom announced that he had someone that wanted to say a few words and that we should meet in his spacious living room. And so Leighton Stewart gave us the story of kind of what was going on in the world of climate change and CO2, and that he had written a book, something like the name of it might have been CO2 is Good or something like that.
Fire Ice in Paradise.
Yeah, Fire Ice in Paradise. When Hal Dwaran and I were there, we after the meeting, we were talking and we looked at each other and both had the same thought that, hey, we should look into this and find out what the real answer is. And so that was our start, and that was April of 2011. Well, we scheduled a meeting in September, and we had 4 or 5 speakers, and everybody was saying CO2 is not harmful and CO2 is good. So we said, gee, this is not objective. So we purposely invited a couple of guys from Texas A&M, I hate to say, and a guy from University of Houston, and they all spoke on the warmest side of the argument. And so there we start out with an objective start, and we've always been objective. We have to consider someone's thoughts, whether they're a nutcase or not, but depending on the degree of being nutcases, we might spend less time with them. But nevertheless, we look at this as a science operation. And we, early on, probably the first meeting in 2012, Hal Dwyer suggested that we determine to what extent human-related releases of CO2 into the atmosphere can cause Earth's surface temperature increases that would have unacceptable harmful effects. So we commenced to research the data, watch presentations of others, attending climate conferences, in particular the Heartland Institute had a wonderful annual convention that we made many new friends with people that we could learn from. By February 2012, we had formed some basic conclusions without doing any serious analysis ourselves, just evaluating what was going on. And it was obvious that climate models were predicting more warming than the measured data showed. And we concluded from that that climate model answers should not be used. 50 years ago, computers were not what they are today, but with these barely able to operate computers, we did design some models. Hal Dwyer in particular had a model that predicted what would happen when the lunar module landed on the moon, depending on what the vertical velocity was at touchdown and the horizontal. If you have too much horizontal, you're going to trip over. But item C there, during manned spaceflight designs, models were used only after they were validated by empirical data from experiments. And that was the way it was then, and that's the way it is with me today. Next slide. So in February 2014, Hal completed his bounding analysis, and there are 20 or so forcing functions of the climate. And everybody else in the world is beating themselves to death trying to figure out how to make their climate model work. They're still getting wrong answers by a factor of 200 or 300%. But we used two parameters. One was the measured Earth surface average temperatures in degrees centigrade, and the measured atmospheric CO2 concentration in parts per million from I-score data, and the more recent, since 1950 or so, measurements at Mauna Loa. And of course, Tom Weissmuller was concerned about using the accepted Earth surface temperatures because he knew of some errors in that. But nevertheless, we picked some data that was generally agreed to by everybody, and we knew that it wasn't that far off. During the Apollo, we were used to using less than perfect data because there are too many uncertainties in what's happening in outer space. So Hal's analysis determined that CO2 emissions could not cause more than 1 degree centigrade global warming this century. We published that in 2014. In 2016, he repolished his analysis, took into consideration other greenhouse gases, still came up with about the same answer. And by the way, we sent a copy of that to Don Trump. I think it was just before he decided to leave the Paris Peace Accord. Oh, by the way, important point here, he calculated what the worst case would be, and he didn't bother to calculate the minimum because it's not consequential. It's probably somewhere close to zero or even negative, possibly. For the last 6 years, we've published this solution in our website, made presentations at international climate conferences with little progress. The public is horrified by the continued false science statements that are publicized by fake media. Journalism is being used as a political tool to convince our people that government action is necessary at the expense of trillions of dollars of taxpayers' money. If you're not paying any attention to the politicians, they seem to be using the lies that, well, the last point on this slide is lies are being taught to our children in school and universities because they're teaching catastrophic global warming theories, and it's wrong by a factor of 200% to 300% too high. That's scaring the living bejeebers out of everybody, not only the children, but the adults too. But that's a tactic, a political tool to convince people that they've got a problem and the government's there to rescue them. All they got to do is send more money, trillions of dollars we're speaking of. This is totally ridiculous. We've got a presentation later in the afternoon about specifically addressing that. Okay, we're trying a series of these Zoom symposiums because it's the least form of media to reach masses. By masses, we're starting with a dozen people. Hopefully it'll get up to a couple of hundred people that we're reaching with these. And by recording these sessions, we can publish it on our website. And people along the line can find out what we're talking about today. Here's my message. It's been reemphasized recently. We've restructured and reworded a lot of our reports that we put out. They're more understandable by laymen. The people that need to know this don't normally have PhDs, maybe not even gone to college. But the population that's paying the bill for all this needs to know what we know. And what we know is that Mother Nature is controlling climate. CO2 emissions are not. And more CO2 is definitely beneficial to Mother Nature's work. And there's very good proof of this statement in our published reports and on presentations you'll hear in this series. So thanks for the opportunity to hear my side of the story. You can contact me by going to our website, therightclimatestuff.com. There is a page at the back that says contact TRCS. Ask your question and we'll get an answer for you. Thank you. We have a question? Yeah, I hear you.
Let me make one real quick comment. Jim, your summary at the very bottom is outstanding. That's the message that needs to be provided to all people that are interested in this subject in a wide range of audiences, in particular politicians.
I'll make a comment if I could. I didn't get to do it on Anita's thing. I think there's something that's really important here that encompasses both your talk, Tom, and Anita's. And it has to do with full doing critical thinking both in and out of school and the lack thereof that's been propagandized. And I wanted to reinforce something that Anita said earlier about the different forms of education over in particular Europe, India, Pakistan, versus here. I had the privilege in the late 70s I was living in the Bay Area, of flying to New York from San Francisco, and I got to sit with Edward Teller. He was flying to Moscow to go to their science group. He was representing our science community, and he expounded at length on the differences in the tutorial system they have in Europe, which don't really teach you how to think. They teach you how to regurgitate what they want your professor to have you think. Whereas over here, we have the ability of doing independent research, and that's always been the difference. He had mentioned that he was going over there and he knew they had plasma weapon technology and all this stuff, but the problem was they didn't know what to do with it. And I think the program that Anita is doing on encouraging entrepreneurship, encouraging STEM education, is something that is vitally important, and that we at the Right Climate Stuff should be kind of using that vehicle and promoting getting the truth out and getting critical thinking so people come up to with their own conclusions. And I just wanted to throw that in there as a comment that's validated from mind far greater than mine. That is a very important point, and I think it's something we should be reinforcing, both as an organization and as an objective going forward.
Yeah, one last comment about Anita saying, I am amazed that they're teaching these kids to work the problems the way they're working. They're forced to work as teams. They're forced to work in an organized way. And what a wonderful lesson. I wish I could have done that when I was a junior or senior myself in high school. Thank you, Anita.
The issue of critical thinking, one of the problems with people being able to critically think is they're not given information. They're not given all the information. The part of the problem, not giving enough information. Now, usually when you see presentations about so-called climate change, people never tell you what are the consequences if the people who are promoting dangerous climate change actually carry out politically what they have in mind. People don't normally tell you what it's going to do to your actual day-to-day living, your heating, your purchasing items. The details aren't specified. And although people may be interested in the science, they don't understand that as well as what's going to hit them directly. So I'm just suggesting that more detailed information be given along with presentations. That's it.
And while we're on the break, I guess I'll add to that. I agree, Larry, 100%. Scientists and engineers tend to want to speak in terms of the science and engineering facts. The other side tends to speak in terms of emotion. And they make a big case for, the Earth is going to fry. We're going to have all of these big problems because of a slight warming of CO2. So personalizing it, like you suggest, is right on. Agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think one other comment there. All we need to do is look at the state of California to see what consequences can get so jumbled up that they don't even know which way is up, and having all electric cars by 2035 and where are they going to get the electricity for them, those kinds of consequences. But I think part of the process that Anita was talking about is the need to have you organize not only solving a problem, but understanding what the consequences are. This is what entrepreneurship is all about, and what Americans do better than any other country in the world. And that is to do applied science, applied engineering, so that you create products, you look at consequences, because eventually you have to sell something. And so someone has to have a value statement on what that is. And I think that's part of the critical thinking process. It can't just be coming to an engineering conclusion or a statement of data. I think we have to be spending as much time not only talking about the data in detail to justify our conclusions, but to also expound on what the consequences and the likelihoods of those events are going to be. So Larry, your comments are very well taken.
Thank you.
Agreed. This is Joe DeLeo. One of the consequences, as you mentioned, California is an example of what happens with environmentalism run wild. But here in the Northeast, because of RGGI, we pay 60, 70% higher electricity rates than the rest of the country. And we don't know it. And the reason why is gasoline prices are down, fortunately, right now. So that makes up for the increased electric bills. And there's rolling blackouts. And as they found out in California and elsewhere where they've pushed the renewables too far, too fast. So consequences are significant.
Yeah, just try replacing all the food in your refrigerator after a rolling blackout has knocked you out for 3 days.
Right. And Larry happens to live in the state with the highest electricity prices in the country.
Right.
Connecticut. Even higher in California.
I'm in Maryland. I'm not too far behind. The People's Republic of, yes.
Oh, we
And
on
by the
break?
way, I'm going to chime in a little bit. There are other, Anita runs a beautifully professionalized organization with her kids. Here in the Northeast, we have another similar thing going. It's called JETS, and JETS stands for Junior Engineering Technical Society. A number of high schools have these teams, and they form them. And the setup is pretty similar to what Anita does. The difference is these kids go to a organization that helps handicapped people perform their jobs better. And the kids are challenged to look at how people are doing their jobs with their handicaps, and then give them technical assistance, maybe even design materials that helps them do those jobs better. Now, I coached the local high school team for a number of years, and I was very proud when I took them to the state championships. My son then graduates from RPI with honors. He takes over the team and takes them to the national championships twice. And 4 times, they won twice. And the productivity improvement on the handicapped people working in these places is dramatic. And it gives the kids a great feeling. They're doing things that are useful, and they learn the same kinds of technical skills that Anita's group learns in a slightly different orientation. So if you do have local chapters of JETS available, I suggest that you take the time to coach some kids and do the right thing, just like Anita has done, and just like my son has done in my own footsteps.
Just as a thought, I'm wondering, when you have different topics, whether we can create a course or a program where you use modeling and critical thinking like Hal did as kind of a legacy for him, to work something through Anita's type of program that you could set up a STEM-oriented high school type course, in effect, that would critically think the climate and all the different aspects having to do with agriculture and energy production and lifestyle and poverty and all these kinds of things. I'm wondering if that might not be a format or a venue that we could help create that could possibly use some of Anita's expertise and how to put these together. Because a lot of the issue is, as she said, it's process. You're teaching them how to go about thinking about this.